You invited me along to talk about the RiscDock. Okay, so I had it all nicely set up at the other end of the building, and then the Wi-Fi went off, and then that's all conked out. So RiscDock then is it's a portable system. It's a desktop system. It can be used to do presentations. It's unique, I think, in terms of native RISCOS laptop type things, in that you can see on screen what you can see on an external monitor or a projector. It can just be used as a portable display. So if you want to, you can just use it as, a monitor for other things. It works with quite a few OSs that I've tried in various different ways, and it will act as a KVM device between a RISCOS computer module, is what I'm having to call it, and a smartphone. If you can plug a smartphone into the other side and your smartphone is capable, then you can switch between the two and they'll both be where they were before. So in terms of the RiscDock itself, it's a fairly standard looking laptop device. In as much as it looks like a laptop. There are just the one major difference, I guess, is it doesn't have the brain inside. The brain is very slightly on the outside and docks into it. That does give you that opportunity, though, that you can change the brain into a different brain if you want to. So the basis of it is it's a 14-inch Full HD 1920 by 1080 screen. It has an 84-key keyboard. It's an American-style keyboard. I guess we suffer with that in as much as there aren't enough of us to warrant and making perhaps an ISO keyboard in that respect. It's got a 2-key trackpad. Inside it, though, is a 500 milliamp hour battery, which powers both the dock itself and the computer module that's connected up. So again, in that respect, it becomes like any other laptop device. It has USB ports for peripherals such as like a mouse or a smartphone, and I'll explain a bit more about that. And it has a 12-volt 4-amp charger for fast charging the device. It takes about an hour and a half to charge it up fully. And then you've got 2, 3, 4 hours use, depending on what you've got plugged in. Some things drain it much quicker than others. Some things you can get like a decent amount of time out of it fairly comfortably. So on the right-hand side, where the peripherals go, there's a standard USB 2 Type A socket. You can plug a mouse in there. You can plug anything with a standard USB socket that works under RISCOS, and it will just work. It just passes through the dock into the computer module at the other side. It's got an ordinary 3.5mm audio socket, which works. So you plug external speakers in and sound comes out. There are internal speakers in there anyway, but plugging external speakers in gives you that option to have better quality sound, better volume, whatever you want. It has a USB 3.2 Type C port, which is fully enabled, so it will do video. If your device does video, it will do power, it will do data, and with a simple adapter that can be converted into a normal USB Type A, the one that we'd kind of expect, and all the bells and whistles are just ignored. I've tried some adapters today to try and get that to work as an extra device on the KVM, and it won't. It's a bit like trying to use a DVI to DisplayPort converter. It'll work one way really easily, and that's as an input. Trying to get it to do an output, you need to power it, and then suddenly the cable goes up from like £9 to £50, and it's missing some of the facilities, and that's not where we want to be. And it's got the power input 3.5mm socket as well for the power adapter that comes with it. On the left side, where you dock things, there's a USB Type A, a mini HDMI, and a USB Type C, which only does power, but it's capable of outputting 5 volts and 5 amps, which, as you'll perhaps realize, is the requirement for a Raspberry Pi 5. So it's quite nicely managed to work with that. So generally, there's nothing else you can do with that other than plug the dock in, the computer module in, and it'll power it from there and connect it up, and everything works. The right side is more for connecting extra peripherals on top. So the computer modules, I had to think of something to call them. In terms of the RISCOS one, it's based on a Raspberry Pi 4. And I'm going to say for now, because I think we've worked out an alternative which should give us more power and better connectivity and better disk speed. I've just got to wait for something to arrive, give it a go. I can't see why it wouldn't work, but you never know. Couldn't see why the adapter for the KVM didn't work, but it did. And we're supplying that with a Raspberry Pi with 4 gigabytes of RAM, 128 gigabytes of storage, overclocked to 2 gigahertz. Obviously now I can say Wi-Fi. Depending on your preferences, it'll either work really well or sometimes. And then Ethernet as well, because it's basically using a Raspberry Pi 4. And that docks into the side of the RiscDock and then becomes the brain of the laptop. You can also dock that into a desktop, which we've developed, so it becomes a desktop system as well, but I'll talk to you about that later. And the advantage of it using a straightforward, ordinary run-of-the-mill Raspberry Pi 4 is it just uses nightly builds if that's what you want to use, and they will just work as normal because it's a fairly standard build. We've only included a little bit of software on there to map some of the keys that are missing. Obviously, being an American keyboard and being a laptop keyboard, they weren't particularly keen on having a pound sign anywhere, so we've had to map that to something. They weren't particularly keen on having a break key, so we've had to map that somewhere. And the trackpad clearly doesn't have a third mouse button, so we've had to map that to the menu key on the keyboard as well. But apart from that, that's the only software we include that's different to what you'd get on a normal nightly build. There are no proprietary ROMs. You don't need to wait for us to produce a new one. It will just work with the stock one that comes overnight. And for the Linux side, if people are opting for a Linux compute module, that's based on a Raspberry Pi 5 because it's the fastest. It does use more power, but it gives us a really easy option to provide NVMe on that, as well as overclocking the CPU a bit more, and you get the standard things that you'd get with the Raspberry Pi 5, such as Wi-Fi and Ethernet. Again, it docks into the side of the laptop. If you're not using it as a laptop, with the desk dock that we've created, you dock it in there. You can just use it as a desktop system. It'll play on your monitor with your keyboard and mouse, and just work as a standard Raspberry Pi 5. And again, there's nothing else that we're using apart from a standard build of Raspberry Pi OS, which we provide on NVMe. So it goes like that proverbial stuff off a shovel. There's no need for the SD card on a Raspberry Pi 5 to be involved at all. For Linux, it just works straight from the NVMe, and it flies. You kind of boot it up and it's there, and it's ridiculously quick. Okay, the desk dock itself, I'll be honest, that's not what it looks like. We started off with something that big, and now it's absolutely tiny. It's about the acrylic cover on it is about 1 centimeter wide, and that just like docks with either of the computer modules to create that desktop system. Really, it gives you 2 full-size HDMI ports, which are more useful under Linux than they perhaps are for RISCOS. Only one will work on RISCOS as we'd expect. It allows you to power it externally via USB-C, or there are a couple of terminal plugs in the back if you wanted to wire it up to something else. I'm not sure why you would, but the option's there, although they are removable, so you can just unplug the little plug that goes in there. And as I generally like on most things that we've tried to do, it brings all the ports out onto one side, so you haven't got bits of cable spewing out in all different directions. Kind of always resented the original Raspberry Pi for that. So we supply you with both. If you've bought two modules, that works reasonably well. You're effectively getting two systems for the price of one. You're getting a laptop running RISCOS and a desktop running Linux at the same time. If you swap them over, and you've got a desktop running Linux and a laptop running RISCOS. So you've actually got two different machines all in with that. Now, obviously, being a Raspberry Pi 4 for the RISCOS side, you could just take the SD card out and plug a new one in. Where's the fun in that if you can do something where it effectively gives you two machines at the same time, and you can interoperate between them using VNC or RDP or whatever you want to do. It's not like you're just turning one off and putting that SD card to a side and then using the other one. They can both be used at the same time. So several other devices that we've tested so far. I'm absolutely flying through this. Dock fairly simply. We've tested quite a few versions of Linux. We've tested Windows 10 and 11 on different devices. We've tested RISCOS using a Raspberry Pi 4. If you've got a ROCK Pi 4C or a ROCK Pi 4C Plus, they'll also work with the cradles. So these are the easier options. Obviously, you'd need to go to RComp to get the ROM and the ROM scheme from them for that, but it would just work. It will work with a Jetson Nano under Linux or a ROCK Pi 5, 5A under Linux as well. There is a Redexa X4, which is an x64 machine that should work as well. I can foresee some issues with that, so I definitely wouldn't go for that anytime soon. In as much as the size of the heat sink that is required to keep that cool is I don't know, bigger than some actual RISCOS computers I've got. To be fair, it's like a good couple of inches thick, and I've got a feeling that's going to get completely in the way unless you're prepared to live with quite a few trailing cables and things like that. And one of the things that I was surprised about is if you remember a long time ago, we used to have like the compute sticks that were based on Intel Atom processors that were basically a long, thin stick with a HDMI port or HDMI plug on one end. Generally, they ran from 5 volts. It can provide 5 volts. If you get a mini HDMI to HDMI adapter, plug that in, use the USB-C cable to power it, it will just work. So it looks a bit bigger than the docks that we're talking about. But at that point, you can run Windows on it relatively straightforwardly. And there are some more modern ones that use sort of newer Celeron processors that, again, are powered at 5 volts, and they will work as well. So that's a much more modern sort of 2023 era machine that will work plugged into the side. So there are endless options for different things to use the RiscDock for a load of other stuff. And I think that's one of the beauties of it in terms of it being a laptop shell without a brain. The amount of brains that you can just connect up really simply does kind of make a lot of sense in terms of what you might want it to do. If you just want it to do RISCOS, that's fine. That's dead straightforward. You don't need to worry about it. If you want it to do a range of other things, the options are, I think, endless. Some of the other things that we've played with just because we can is it will work with your titanium, your ARM X6, anything you want, as long as you've got the right cables. And they're fairly standard HDMI to mini HDMI. They're not difficult to come by. USB-A to USB-A, they're not difficult to come by. You might need to power them externally. You're never going to power a titanium on 5 volts. But if you power it externally, you can use it as a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse for your titanium, and that will just work. It's quite nice. You can do the same with a PC or any machine. It's got an HDMI port and uses standard USB peripherals, will just work. Again, there's a bit of, I'm not sure why you'd want to do that. And then there's a bit of, because you can. Why would you not if you could, just to see whether it did, which is where I've been for the last 3 weeks or so. Some other things in terms of portable display, just plugging something into the HDMI port will work. I've used it with an Amazon Fire Stick. It just works. It's fairly straightforward. You can do what you want with that. They're relatively cheap, as are a load of those Android devices that are along the same lines of being like a stick with an HDMI port that you're supposed to plumb into the back of your telly. If you plumb them into this, they just work in the same way. So for a few quid, you can run Android on it. You can run anything you like. It's quite flexible in terms of that. As it says there, if you just plumb something in the HDMI port, it's likely to work because it doesn't know what it's supposed to be doing. It just goes, oh, there's a signal coming in. I'll chuck that on screen, have a look. And because it's a fairly standard 1920 by 1080 full HD resolution, that's what most tellies are capable of doing. So the Fire Stick thinks it's a telly. The RiscDock thinks it's just an input signal. I'll display it on screen and we're all good. You can, if you really want, use it as a second screen for your non-RISCOS system. So if you really wanted to use it as a second screen for your Windows machine or a Linux machine, and again, it would do that. It just recognizes it as an input signal and says, okay, I'll display what you've got on my screen. You could use it, as I said before, as a display and as a keyboard and mouse at the same time, and it would probably do that. No guarantees, but it'll definitely display the screen straight off the bat. So it does give you like endless possibilities of different things that you can do. And I've tried as many as I could find without having to resort to buying loads and sending them back. But certainly the compute sticks and things like that are pretty much as plug and play once you've got the generally USB-C to micro USB cable or adapter, and an A to A, USB-A to USB-A cable, which we supply with it anyway. Once you've got those, you're pretty much sorted out for running all kinds of things. It is useful as a presentation device. So one of the things where we struggle with other native RISCOS laptops is you can either have it on your laptop screen, or if you've got one of the USB to HDMI things, you end up turning your laptop screen off for it to be able to display on a monitor. With ours, because there's an HDMI in, it's relatively straightforward to buy a cheap, to buy a cheap HDMI duplicator, use a couple of cables, and we're trying to source cables of an appropriate length rather than them being 2.5 meters or something like that. And you can run an external monitor and the monitor on the lap dock at the same time. And you can see in front of you what you're doing, use the keyboard and mouse, and you can project that using a standard HDMI projector or on a second screen or whatever you want to do. It will only do duplicate. So you can only see the same thing on both screens. There is no option to move one thing to one screen and one thing to another, but it's fairly unique in terms of native RISCOS laptops, and maybe the A4 used to be able to do it, but if people have got them knocking about still, then you might want to sell them. They're probably worth a lot more than they were. For the rest of us, the other newer native RISCOS laptops aren't capable of doing that, whereas this one does in a relatively straightforward and a relatively cheap way. The adapter that I've been testing for the last few days is well under 30 quid to use with an appropriate set of cables. So for people who do regular displays or presentations using RISCOS, then this is kind of the ideal thing in terms of it makes that really, really straightforward. Plug a few extra cables in, use your same computer module that you did before, jobs are good, and you can project it and you can have it showing on a second monitor. So I'll try and show you how that works. You might be able to see the mouse moving, and you'll see, I had to think about what I was doing, but you'll see that it's like displaying on the laptop screen at the bottom and the external monitor at the top. So you get exactly the same thing on both screens. There's no lag, there's no delay, it's not slowed down in any way. It just does what you expect it to do. It just kind of works in that really straightforward way. So that's great for people who use perhaps things like Fade to do presentations or things like that, because you can see what you're doing and project the same thing out to everybody else. In terms of a smartphone KVM, if you've got a suitable smartphone, I haven't, but my partner has, so I have to keep borrowing hers, and she keeps getting really annoyed about that. It's dead straightforward. You plug a USB-C cable into the phone, one into the dock, to the USB-C port on the dock, and it works out that it's been connected up, and suddenly you've got desktop mode, if that's enabled, from your smartphone onto the laptop. So if you've used Dex or something like that, it doesn't look anything like Android anymore. The same apps work, but it's kind of more like desktop Android. And that is quite nice. It will also do, if you don't enable Dex or your phone doesn't have that, it will just do like mirroring your basic screen from your phone or onto the laptop, and you can like use the mouse to control it in the same way that you would any other computer in that respect. One of the advantages of that is if you dock a RISCOS computer on the left and the smartphone using the USB-C cable on the right, by pressing one key, you can switch between them. Now, if you remember back to things like, there were things called RiscDocks a few years ago, which were basically the same thing, only much more expensive. When you switched between devices, you basically had to turn one off, unplug it, plug the other one in, turn it back on. A bit like when we used to use the Atrix laptops with Raspberry Pis, what seems like an age ago. It's got that. With this, though, you press the key and they both just carry on. So it disconnects the USB, it disconnects the video, but it leaves the power in play. So when you switch back, it's exactly where you were when you left. So you can, as somebody said, oh, that'd be really handy. If I get a text, I can look at it on my screen by just pressing F1, flicks over to the device. I can answer the text and I can flick back and I can go back to doing what I was doing in impression or whatever it is I was doing before without any break in power, without anything going off or changing. They both just carry on working in exactly the same way as you would kind of expect them to. So I'll show you some of the stuff in action, then I'll try and show you the actual bits on screen. That might be easier said than done, but I'll give it a go. I did have, at the other end of the building, a lovely external camera rigged up on a tripod and everything like that, but that really don't work if there's no Wi-Fi, because you wouldn't have got into the meeting at all. So this is just a dead simple way of showing you how it docks. You need a little bit of pressure to get it to dock, but once it's docked, it's fine. And if I pause it there, you can see that there's a little battery monitor popped up there to say it's fully charged. Now that is controlled by the F11 key. And all you have to do, if you're thinking, I wonder how much battery I've got left, is press F11 on the keyboard or function an F11, and the little battery monitor will pop up. And you've kind of got a bit like a smartphone. You've got 6 bars. First three, or when you've got 6, 5, and 4, they're green. When you've got 3 left, they go blue. 2 is orange. And then when you've got 1, it's red. And plug it in at that point, because there is no other way of monitoring that. It doesn't send any signal to the computer to say, I'm going to shut down in a minute. It just goes off. So keep an eye on that. If you've got it plugged in to the power because you're not out and about, or even if you are out and about and you've plugged it into the power, it won't show you the battery level. There's an indicator on the lap dock itself that says it's charging, and that will go off when it's fully charged. So you can unplug it, or you can leave it plugged in, and it will work ad infinitum at that point. But that's a really useful hardware wired battery monitor that's controlled by the lap dock. So even if nothing's docked and you've turned it on, you can see how much battery you've got left, regardless of waiting for some software to kick in, measure it, calibrate it, get it a bit wrong. The hardware does that for you automatically. And I'm talking too much about that. Okay, so you can see the screens come on at that point. There's a standard RISCOS screen there. Oh, that kind of went a bit too quick. Let me just go back on that. May well have to show you all again. We had a minor issue there. We were using, because it was to hand, a copy of the latest RISCOS Direct, which makes extensive use of any mode, I think, which kind of mucks up the boot up screen. Using EDID as the mode finder and everything else, it just works in a straightforward way. So you can see that that's working with RISCOS, running usual apps. Menu key works as mouse menu. There is or was a bit of an issue, which I think is something like 12 or 15 years old, with Ovation Pro, that turns the numlock key on, regardless of whether you turn it off or not. And we had to look back through David Pilling's archives to work out how to fix that. It's a fairly simple fix, and we've included that with the device. So I've unplugged the RISCOS module, and I'm going to plug the Linux module in now. Just turn it back on. Battery light comes back up, just to show you how much charge you've got left. Standard Raspberry Pi OS screen there. And we're good to go. And that's all running from NVMe, no SD card involved. And then you can do whatever you want. You can use RoxFiler if you want, so it looks a bit more familiar. Well, if you're using RISCOS 6, I suppose. It does have the Raspberry Pi 5, you may or may not know, as an option to shut down from a menu, or there's a little button on the back that if you press it twice, that will do the shutdown safely for you as well. So that's kind of the docking process. This is the use of the desk dock. So you can see the RISCOS module there being unplugged from the laptop dock, slide it into the desk dock, and there you've got a standard Raspberry Pi with 2 full-size HDMI ports and a USB-C in for power. And it will also work, as it does on the Raspberry Pi 4, as an extra USB hub, but you perhaps won't want to do that at that point. But it does just do that, and there you've got your second computer for the price of one, just by unplugging that bit, plugging that bit in, and the green bit at the back there pulls off, so you don't need to see that sticking out. And there you go. That's it. So that just works as a standard desktop computer You could leave the HDMI cable and the power cable plugged in. You might want to switch it on and off though. And then that becomes an effective desk dock for that. And everything else just works as you'd expect it to work at that point. Okay, so if you want to have a look at that, you can buy it from a website. You can look at everything that we do. We've got a load of computer systems and stuff like that. I can show you some of the bits in real life, not as well as I would have liked at the other end of the building, but at least I can show you or attempt to show you some of that stuff and hope that it doesn't blur out like it does sometimes. So there's the, okay, let me just turn the blur off. Okay, so there's the standard dock. You get a lovely silver sticker to go with it. And there it is. It's just a laptop. It just looks like a laptop. It's got the ports that you'd expect on that side for docking. It's got some extra ports. One of the other advantages, I think, was the ability to output sound over the 3.5 mil speaker port, I guess. That's a nice addition that you don't always get with other things. And we do it with like I'll show you the if I can. I'll dock the Linux device there. It just plumbs into the side. It is fairly stable at that, and I've certainly sat with that on my lap on the arm of the settee on a table in the garden in midwinter. That's always fun. And it is fairly rigid. The way it's been done means that it is kind of fairly well supported with the acrylic bit running underneath there to hold everything up and hold it off the table as well. And to undock it, it is just a case of unplugging it and it's done. If you want to use there's a RISCOS module there with a mouse adapter in. As you saw on the video, to dock it for the desktop dock, it just slides in, little bit of a push, and jobs are good. And there's your Raspberry Pi 4 computer. 2 HDMI ports, power in, and again, it just pulls apart. And as I said, we'd got it down that the base plate that you can see there is to support the Raspberry Pi and keep it off the bench or wherever it is you're using it. The top bit ended up being a thin sliver of acrylic just to cover over the ports and get it to match up with the rest of it to protect everything that's in there. We've got it'll be difficult to say on this one because I prefer a clear one. And there's an internal strut there as well, provide a bit of extra protection so you can't poke your pen inside, things like that. Does kind of make it a bit prettier as well. But the bare naked thing, I guess if you want, and people could do this to just go bare naked. There it is. That's it in a nutshell. It's just a Raspberry Pi 4, the adapter board, which again just docks into the side of the laptop. And if you wanted it like really small and thin, then you can kind of see how thin that is at that point. But again, it's still fairly rigid. I gave people the option, I guess, of having the cover and the protection. But if you don't want it, unscrew the screws, take it off, and you'll be back with something like that looks a bit more, I don't know, steampunk, industrial. Is fairly effective though, especially if you want access to the GPIO or something like that. Then I guess that would be the way to go in terms of that. That is pretty much it. That's everything I can really show you without being able to demonstrate it down that end of the room where Wi-Fi is not working. But there you go. It's a Raspberry Pi 4 laptop. Now, I will be honest, I have taken one apart to see how much room there is inside. to see if I could like get something inside so it looked like a more traditional laptop, and I don't think I can. It looks a bit too bulky with the bits that are in there, and my soldering skills aren't brilliant, so I won't want to risk like desoldering the ports on one side in order to connect up cables. Somebody who's better at it than me might take that on as a challenge. There's a bit of room if you can find something thin enough. We did look at a compute module 4 board that may well fit. It's like at its highest point, it's one USB port high. So that might just about squeeze in. I'm not sure what kind of damage you'd do, and it's not that easy to get in terms of that. We aren't like taking feet off and things like that. So I had to have a look because you do, but I did think that'd be a nice alternative. It may well be because I do think there'll be a lot of these. It may well be that at some point it's not impossible to just create a motherboard that fits inside, and that might be a really easy way of getting some sort of Raspberry Pi type laptop, perhaps cheaper. I don't have the money or capacity to be able to do that, or the skills really, but somebody else might be able to do that at one point. I think the one thing that probably has happened for us now with the advent of certainly the Raspberry Pi 5 and then the Compute Module 5 is nobody's going to develop anything for the Raspberry Pi 4 or the Compute Module 4 anymore. So where I'd always held out a bit of hope that somebody would produce a Compute Module 4 laptop, and I think that hope's gone. And I've tried using a Compute Module 4 on a Compute Module 5 carrier, and unless it's been designed for both, it just falls over going, it just says I can't see USB 3. So I think we're kind of scuppered at that point now that the Compute Module 5 is out and in the wild. I think that effectively scuppers any chance we had of getting a Compute Module 4 laptop that we might have been able to use. It was a shame that, was it Waveshare who did the 15.6-inch laptop? Like literally on the day that they launched the Compute Module 4, they did it with the Compute Module 3. They made a right hash of it, I would say, in as much as it looked like it had got a trackpad, but you flicked the trackpad off to reveal the DSI port and the camera port. It wasn't a trackpad at all. So even as a laptop, you still needed an external mouse. And I guess it's worth mentioning that with this. So on the ports on this side, on the right-hand side, there's a standard USB port there, and you can just plug a mouse into that, and it just works because it passes the USB through to the other side into the Raspberry Pi. And as I said before, with the USB-C, if you get a suitable adapter, and they are a couple of quid because they're great for smartphones, if you get a USB-C adapter, you can put a dongle in there and then connect a standard USB Type A connector into it, and it's all good. So you've effectively got two USB ports on that side, plus the ones on your Raspberry Pi. One's in use to connect it up, but it still leaves you three. And then you've got two more, so you're on five. If you need more than that, buy a USB hub, I think. That's the RiscDock in a nutshell. That went extremely quicker because I didn't have the ability to demonstrate some of the stuff that I wanted to, due to the failings of other technologies, not mine.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. That was jolly interesting. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Yeah. So Andy, so you mentioned the RiscDock and the docks. So what do you actually get when you buy the standard? And can you, if you've already got a Pi 4, just get the actual computer brain element, just get the kit?
You can. You can.
Yeah.
The standard offer is the dock itself, power adapter, and the RISCOS module as it stands. On pre-orders, we were doing the dock for free. That's when we're not going to discontinue that one. Kind of when we've got stock in as a freebie, there will be a small price for that. But if you've already got your own Pi 4, then I'll just knock you 50 quid off. You'd still get the cradle and the connectors and everything else that you needed. So yeah, you just need to include your own Pi 4, your own SD card, everything else would come in the kit. But because you've got the Pi 4, I'll just knock 50 quid off the price. On the order form that you can't see because it's hidden, there would be a bit on there saying that if you've already got a Pi 4, regardless of what it is, the one I would be buying would be a 4 gig one, so I won't be buying that. So that's where the 50 quid discount comes in. So it'd be back as it currently stands at 249 posted. And in a really bizarre way, it and Royal Mail, who knows? It makes more sense to post it out as 2 items because it's like half the price in terms of postage. So if I post the laptop bit as 1 item and then all the other bits secondary in another parcel, it makes it a lot cheaper and is better insured. So who knows?
Probably the same person who designed the Ryzen did that pricing concept.
Maybe so, yeah. And I was looking at it thinking that seems a lot. If I do it this way, oh, it's a bit like trains, isn't it? If you look long enough, you find out a much cheaper way of doing it, and that's where I ended up with that. So we have got a couple left in stock that came in recently, and I'm going to have to order some more. So um, let me see if I can remember where the hidden order form is, and then I could put it in the chat and people could have a look at that if they wanted and see what it is they want to do. There are a load of other things that go along with it, should you want them, like the duplicator, so you could do the presentations. I'm still working on the cables, getting like a decent set of cables for that. There's obviously a carry case. Just bear with me. A carry case that comes with an extra pouch so that you can put your modules in the pouch when they're not in use.